You wake up one morning and something feels fundamentally wrong. Not the kind of wrong that coffee can fix or therapy can explain, but a wrongness that sits in your bones like an ancient echo. You look at the world around you, at people rushing through their lives, at the shallow concerns that consume entire generations, and you feel like an anthropologist studying a civilization you once knew but can no longer recognize. This isn't depression. This isn't alienation in the modern sense. This is something far older, far more dangerous. Rudolf Steiner called it the awakening of cosmic memory, the moment when an old soul suddenly remembers that it has walked this earth not once, not twice, but hundreds, perhaps thousands of times. And with that memory comes a burden so heavy that many never recover from its weight. Modern neuroscience stumbled upon fragments of this truth without understanding its depth. Research from the University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies has documented over 2,500 cases of children spontaneously recalling previous lives with verifiable details they couldn't possibly know. Dr. Ian Stevenson spent 40 years investigating these cases, dismissing fraud, fantasy, and coincidence, only to arrive at a conclusion the scientific establishment refuses to fully embrace. Some form of consciousness persists beyond death and occasionally breaks through the veil. But what Steiner understood, what the laboratories cannot measure, is that this isn't just about remembering a past life. It's about the soul's exhaustion from carrying the weight of too many lifetimes, too many deaths, too many cycles of hope and disappointment. The Tibetan Buddhist tradition speaks of the bardo, the intermediate state between death and rebirth, where the soul makes a choice whether to return or transcend. Ancient texts describe how some souls become trapped in what they call the wheel of samsara, condemned to return again and again until they learn what they came to learn. But here's what they don't tell you in the sanitized versions of Eastern wisdom. Some souls don't return to learn. They return because they're addicted to the intensity of physical existence, or because they carry debts from previous incarnations that must be paid. The signs of cosmic memory awakening are subtle at first. You might experience déjà vu so powerful it stops you in your tracks. You might feel inexplicably drawn to historical periods you've never studied, or recoil from certain places with a terror that has no rational basis. Children with old souls often speak about death with a casualness that disturbs their parents, as if they're describing something familiar rather than feared. You might find yourself knowing things you were never taught, understanding complex spiritual concepts without ever reading about them, or feeling a profound exhaustion that sleep cannot cure. This phenomenon escalates in stages. Stage 1 is the recognition, where you first suspect something is different about you. Stage 2 is the research phase, where you desperately seek explanations in books, religions, and philosophies. Stage 3 is the crisis, where the weight of remembrance becomes almost unbearable and you question whether you want to continue this incarnation at all. Stage 4 is either integration or fragmentation, where you either learn to carry this knowledge with grace or you shatter under its weight. And here's where it becomes truly dangerous. This awakening doesn't just affect individuals. Entire families can carry the signature of old souls, creating households where no one quite fits into normal society. Steiner observed that old souls tend to cluster in certain bloodlines, certain geographical locations, certain epochs of human history. They're called to incarnate together, drawn by invisible threads of karma and unfinished business. The collective impact manifests as a kind of spiritual aristocracy, a hidden layer of humanity that sees through the illusions that captivate younger souls. Your protection protocol begins with acknowledgement without attachment. You must recognize what you are without letting it inflate your ego or crush your spirit. Ancient wisdom from the Hermetic tradition teaches that knowledge of past lives is both a gift and a test. The gift is wisdom. The test is humility. You create a consciousness shield by grounding yourself in present moment awareness while honoring the depth of your experience. Strategic withdrawal from soul-draining environments becomes essential. Not everyone deserves access to your ancient wisdom, and casting pearls before swine, as the Christian mystics warned, leads only to being trampled. The philosophical culmination of this awakening is the understanding that you are simultaneously very old and eternally new. Each incarnation is both a repetition and a revelation. You carry the weight of centuries, yes, but you also carry the possibility of breaking free from the cycle entirely. Steiner taught that recognition is the first step toward liberation, that only by fully embracing what you are can you transcend what you've been. The cosmic memory awakens not to torment you, but to remind you that you chose this, that before you incarnated, you knew exactly what awaited you. You came anyway, because somewhere in the architecture of your soul, you believe that this time, finally, you might remember enough to break free. There's a law operating in the universe that modern psychology refuses to acknowledge, and ancient wisdom never forgot. Every action creates a debt, and debts must be paid. Not in some metaphorical feel-good sense, but in the brutal arithmetic of cosmic justice that Steiner spent his life attempting to decode. You are not just carrying your own life's mistakes. If you're an old soul, you're carrying the accumulated weight of countless lifetimes, debts incurred in incarnations you don't consciously remember, but your deeper self can never forget. This is the hidden burden that explains why some people seem to suffer without cause, why certain souls are born into circumstances that appear monstrously unfair, why you might feel you're paying for crimes you never committed in this life. The karmic mechanism operates with mathematical precision. Harvard researchers studying intergenerational trauma discovered that extreme stress can alter gene expression in ways that transmit to offspring for at least 3 generations. They called it epigenetic inheritance, but what they're measuring is merely the biological shadow of a far deeper phenomenon. Steiner revealed that karmic debt inscribes itself not just in genes, but in the etheric body, the soul's blueprint that carries forward from life to life. Debts from one incarnation become the circumstances of the next. The soldier who killed without remorse may return as a victim of violence. The tyrant reincarnates into oppression. The betrayer is betrayed. Not as punishment from an angry god, but as education from a cosmos that demands balance. Hindu philosophy codified this as the law of karma, teaching that every action bears fruit across lifetimes. Buddhism expanded it into the doctrine of dependent origination, showing how each moment of consciousness creates conditions for future moments across the vast expanse of time. Christian mystics like Origen taught reincarnation until the church declared it heresy, but the truth persisted in secret teachings. As you sow, so shall you reap operates not just within one lifetime, but across the entire journey of the soul. The warning signs that you're carrying heavy karmic debt appear as patterns you cannot break despite your best efforts. You find yourself repeatedly attracted to the same type of toxic relationship, each partner a different face, but the same soul lesson. You experience financial struggles that defy your intelligence and work ethic, as if money slips through your fingers no matter what you do. Health issues emerge without clear medical cause, phantom pains that doctors dismiss, but you know in your bones are real. You feel inexplicably guilty about things that aren't your fault, carry shame that has no origin in your current life's events. These aren't coincidences or bad luck. These are karmic signatures, the soul's way of showing you what remains unpaid. The stages of karmic burden recognition follow a predictable pattern. First comes the suffering itself, experienced as random bad luck or cruel fate. Then comes the questioning, where you start to suspect there's a pattern. Third arrives the research phase, where you explore karmic philosophy and perhaps seek past life regressions or spiritual readings. Fourth is the recognition, the terrible moment when you understand that yes, you really are paying for something you did in another time. Fifth is either acceptance and transformation or denial and continued suffering. The karmic mechanism doesn't just operate individually. Families carry collective karma, entire bloodlines paying for sins of ancestors. Steiner observed karmic groups, clusters of souls who incarnate together repeatedly, playing out complex dramas across centuries. The abused child might be settling accounts with a parent who was once their victim. Sibling rivalries might echo conflicts from ancient civilizations. Family wealth or poverty often reflects collective karmic accounts being balanced across generations. This extends to nations and races as well, explaining historical injustices not as random evil, but as vast karmic adjustments playing out on civilization-scale timelines. Your survival protocol in the face of karmic debt begins with radical acceptance. You cannot heal what you refuse to acknowledge. Past life regression therapy, developed by pioneers like Dr. Brian Weiss at Mount Sinai Medical Center, provides one tool for conscious engagement with karmic patterns. Meditation practices focused on forgiveness, both giving and receiving across all lifetimes, begin to dissolve the energetic chains. The Buddhist practice of metta, loving-kindness meditation, specifically targets karmic dissolution by generating unconditional compassion for all beings across all time. Strategic action means you stop fighting your karma and start working with it. If you're born into poverty, perhaps your soul chose this to learn humility or generosity. If you suffer betrayal, maybe you're being given the opportunity to practice forgiveness for betrayals you once committed. Steiner taught conscious karma transformation through recognizing the lesson embedded in the suffering and extracting its wisdom. The philosophical peak of karmic understanding is this: karma is not punishment but education, and the moment you learn the lesson, the debt is paid. The universe doesn't want you to suffer forever, it wants you to evolve. Every burden you carry is also an opportunity for liberation. The old soul who understands this stops resenting their difficulties and starts mining them for spiritual gold, knowing that each debt paid brings them one step closer to the final freedom. You're surrounded by people, but utterly alone. Not the loneliness of physical isolation, but something infinitely more profound. the existential solitude of a consciousness that has outgrown the concerns that consume everyone around you. While your peers obsess over career advancement, social media validation, and the latest cultural trends, you feel like you're watching children play games whose rules you've long forgotten mattered. This isn't arrogance, this isn't superiority. This is the crushing isolation of the old soul who has lived through so many cycles that the dramas of a single lifetime feel almost unbearably trivial. Rudolf Steiner identified this as one of the most dangerous afflictions of ancient spirits incarnated in modern times, the soul homesickness that no earthly relationship can cure. Neuroscience offers unexpected validation for this experience. Studies at Princeton and UCLA on the default mode network, the brain system active during self-reflection and mind-wandering, show that individuals reporting profound existential isolation display unusual connectivity patterns. Their brains literally process reality differently, spending more time in reflective states that research associates with both creative genius and depressive vulnerability. Dr. Brent Roberts' longitudinal personality studies at the University of Illinois found that certain individuals show trait patterns inconsistent with their chronological age, displaying wisdom markers typically seen only in people decades older. But what brain scans cannot capture is the soul's memory of other worlds, other times, other ways of being that made sense in ways this modern existence never will. Ancient mystical traditions recognized this affliction and gave it names. The Gnostics spoke of the pneumatics, the spiritual elect who felt trapped in material existence, aliens in a foreign land yearning for their true home beyond the stars. Sufi poets like Rumi wrote endlessly of the pain of separation from the beloved, the divine source from which the soul originates and to which it desperately seeks to return. Christian mystics like St. John of the Cross describe the dark night of the soul, a spiritual crisis where all earthly consolations lose meaning and the soul feels abandoned even by God. These weren't poetic metaphors. These were clinical descriptions of the old soul's fundamental condition: homesickness for a dimension of existence that physical reality cannot provide. The signs of this existential solitude manifest in specific ways. You find superficial conversation almost physically painful, feeling your life force drain away during small talk about weather and sports. Deep connection with others happens rarely, if ever, and when it does, it feels like a miracle rather than a natural occurrence. You prefer the company of books, nature, or solitude to most social gatherings, not from misanthropy, but from exhaustion at having to constantly translate your inner experience into language others can comprehend. Children with old souls often have imaginary friends who seem more real to them than actual playmates, or they attach deeply to elderly people with whom they feel a kinship that defies age logic. You might experience what psychologists call anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure in activities that thrill others, not because you're depressed, but because your soul has tasted these pleasures 10,000 times before and knows they lead nowhere lasting. The progression follows predictable stages. Stage 1 is confusion, where you wonder what's wrong with you that you can't enjoy what everyone else seems to love. Stage 2 is seeking, where you desperately try to find your people, your tribe, somewhere in this world. Stage 3 is the crisis of recognition, where you understand that you might never find full belonging here because you don't fully belong here. Stage 4 is either transcendence or despair, where you either make peace with your essential aloneness or it crushes you into isolation so complete that mental illness becomes almost inevitable. The collective dimension of this loneliness manifests when old souls do find each other. There's a recognition that happens, a soul-deep knowing that finally someone understands. These connections are rare but powerful, often feeling more like reunions than meetings. Steiner taught that old souls tend to reincarnate in groups, finding each other across lifetimes to continue soul work together. But he also warned that the recognition of another old soul can be so intense it becomes overwhelming, creating dependencies that aren't healthy or attachments that interfere with each soul's individual journey. Your protection protocol starts with reframing loneliness as solitude, transforming isolation from a wound into a sanctuary. Spiritual practice becomes essential, creating an inner connection to the divine that compensates for lack of human understanding. Contemplative traditions from every culture offer tools: meditation, prayer, ritual, nature immersion, artistic creation. The key is building a relationship with the transcendent that becomes more real and nourishing than any human connection could be. Strategic withdrawal means you stop trying to force yourself into social contexts that drain you and instead carefully cultivate the few relationships that actually feed your soul. Quality over quantity becomes your survival mantra. The philosophical culmination that Steiner taught is this: your loneliness is not a flaw, but a feature, a sign that you're oriented toward a dimension of existence beyond the material. The homesickness you feel is the soul's memory of its divine origin, and that very pain is what will eventually propel you beyond the need for incarnation altogether. You are alone here because you're not from here, and remembering that truth transforms isolation from a curse into a compass pointing home. There comes a moment in the soul's evolution when it simply cannot do this anymore. Not in the sense of suicidal ideation or clinical depression, but something far more profound and terrifying. The soul's refusal to continue incarnating, a spiritual exhaustion so complete that the very mechanism of reincarnation begins to break down. Steiner witnessed this phenomenon in certain individuals and called it soul saturation, the point where a spirit has absorbed so much earthly experience that taking on another physical body becomes almost impossible. It's like forcing yourself to eat when you're already full to the point of nausea, except what you're full of is lifetimes, deaths, births, sufferings, joys, repeated so many times they've lost all meaning. This isn't discussed in popular spirituality because it's terrifying. The possibility that you can become too evolved for Earth, trapped between worlds, unable to fully incarnate but not yet ready to transcend. Research in consciousness studies provides fragmentary evidence for this phenomenon. Dr. Bruce Grayson's work at the University of Virginia on near-death experiences documents cases where individuals report being given a choice whether to return to physical life and describe an overwhelming reluctance to do so, not from suicidal desire, but from recognition that the physical world is simply too dense, too heavy, too exhausting, after glimpsing the freedom of the other side. Studies on what's called spiritual emergence versus spiritual emergency show that some individuals go through consciousness expansions so profound they can barely function in normal reality afterward. Dr. Stanislav Grof's decades of research with holotropic breathwork and psychedelics reveal that some people access transpersonal states of consciousness that make ordinary life feel like trying to live underwater when you've learned you can breathe air. But these scientific observations barely scratch the surface of what Steiner understood, that the soul can literally wear out from too many trips through the birth canal of matter. Eastern traditions encoded this knowledge in their teachings on moksha, or nirvana, liberation from the cycle of birth and death. But they presented it as a goal to be achieved through spiritual practice, not as something that can happen prematurely when the soul hits a breaking point. The Vedic texts describe rare cases of souls who achieve what they call videha mukti, liberation while still in the body, where the person continues to physically exist, but their soul has already transcended the need for further incarnation. Tibetan Buddhism speaks of rainbow body, where advanced practitioners at death dissolve their physical form entirely, leaving only hair and nails, a sign that they've transcended material existence completely. These aren't myths. These are clinical observations of what happens when a soul completes its earthly curriculum. The warning signs of soul saturation appear as a peculiar form of exhaustion that no amount of rest can touch. You wake up tired, not in your body, but in your essence. Everything feels like you're moving through thick mud, not because of physical illness, but because your soul is dragging itself through a reality it's finished with. You experience intense claustrophobia in your own life, a feeling of being trapped in flesh, in time, and physical laws that seem increasingly arbitrary and restrictive. Simple tasks that others handle easily feel monumentally difficult, not from laziness, but from a deep knowledge that none of this matters anymore, that you've done all of this countless times before, and the repetition has become unbearable. You might have vivid dreams of other dimensions where you feel more real and awake than you do in waking life, and the return to physical consciousness each morning feels less like waking, and more like being imprisoned again. The stages of soul saturation progress with dangerous momentum. First comes the vague sense of being done with earthly concerns, which you might mistake for depression or midlife crisis. Second arrives the active resistance to incarnation, where your soul literally starts pulling away from full engagement with physical reality. Third is the crisis point, where you can barely maintain the energy needed to keep your soul anchored in your body. Fourth is either intervention through deep spiritual work that renews the soul's willingness to engage with matter, or a premature exit from physical life. Not suicide exactly, but a soul-level withdrawal that manifests as sudden illness, accident, or simply the lights going out. This phenomenon can affect family systems where multiple old souls incarnate together. Steiner observed bloodlines where soul saturation seemed to run like a hereditary condition, entire families displaying a collective exhaustion with physical existence. These are the families where people die young, not from genetic disease, but from what appears to be a simple lack of will to continue, where multiple generations show the same pattern of checking out early, as if they're all following an invisible schedule written before birth. Your survival protocol, when facing soul saturation, requires what shamanic traditions call a soul retrieval, bringing back the parts of your spirit that have already left. This isn't metaphor, but technique, involving work with practitioners who know how to call a departing soul back into its body. You must find new reasons to engage with physical existence, Not the old carrots of success or pleasure that no longer motivate you, but soul-level purposes that feel worthy of the sacrifice incarnation requires. Steiner taught that service to others, contribution to human evolution, and conscious engagement with one's karma can renew a saturated soul's willingness to stay. The Buddhist practice of bodhisattva vow, where you pledge to keep returning until all beings are liberated, can paradoxically ease saturation by giving it noble purpose. The philosophical insight is this: soul saturation means you're approaching graduation from Earth School, and the exhaustion you feel is the soul's recognition that it's ready for something beyond what physical life can offer. But leaving prematurely, before your assigned work is complete, creates new karma that might require additional incarnations. The solution isn't to push through with willpower, but to consciously complete what you came to do, so that when you finally depart, it's a true completion rather than an escape. Your body knows what your conscious mind has forgotten. Inscribed in your flesh, your bones, your cellular memory are the signatures of thousands of years of existence, marks that cannot be erased by the simple act of being born into a new form. Rudolf Steiner taught that the physical body is the densest layer of the soul's expression, and in old souls, certain physical characteristics recur with such consistency that they become diagnostic markers of ancient spiritual lineage. This isn't mystical speculation. This is observable phenomenon that conventional medicine dismisses because it doesn't fit their materialist paradigm, but the evidence accumulates nonetheless for those willing to see. Cutting-edge research in psychoneuroimmunology reveals that consciousness directly shapes biology in ways that persist across generations. Studies at Mount Sinai School of Medicine on Holocaust survivors found that trauma changed gene expression in specific ways that appeared in their children and grandchildren. Dr. Rachel Yehuda's research demonstrated that extreme experiences don't just psychologically scar, they biologically inscribe themselves into the very code of life that transmits to offspring. But what if this mechanism operates not just within one family line, but across soul incarnations? What if the soul brings forward not just psychological patterns, but physical signatures from previous lives? Steiner observed specific markers that appear consistently in old souls, patterns that modern medicine cannot explain through genetics alone. The eyes, he noted, carry unmistakable signs. Old souls often have eyes that seem ancient, regardless of their chronological age, a depth and weariness that children shouldn't possess. Many report unusual eye colors, or heterochromia, different colored eyes that folklore associates with magical ability, but Steiner understood as the soul's previous incarnations bleeding through into current biology. Ancient wisdom traditions recognize these marks. Celtic lore spoke of the second sight belonging to those born with certain eye markings. Hindu texts describe the tilaka, the third eye mark on the forehead, appearing spontaneously in advanced souls. Christian mysticism recorded stigmata, the spontaneous appearance of Christ's wounds in devoted mystics, proving that consciousness can override biological laws and inscribe itself directly into flesh. Medieval witch hunters cataloged the devil's marks, unusual birthmarks they claimed proved allegiance to dark forces, but which might have been early observations of souls carrying forward physical signatures from traumatic previous deaths. The physical warning signs manifest in patterns that defy medical explanation. You might have birthmarks in locations that correspond to fatal wounds from previous lives, a phenomenon Dr. Ian Stevenson documented extensively in children who remembered dying violently. Chronic pain in specific body parts with no medical cause might be cellular memory of old injuries. Unusual flexibility or physical talents that appear without training suggest muscle memory from previous incarnations where those skills were developed. Some old souls report feeling uncomfortable in their bodies, as if the soul is slightly too large for the flesh container, creating a subtle but persistent sense of physical claustrophobia. Temperature sensitivity, where you're always too hot or too cold regardless of actual climate, might indicate the soul carrying forward adaptation to a previous life's environmental conditions. Sleep pattern disturbances, where you wake at the same time every night or require radically different sleep than others, could reflect circadian rhythms from previous lives in different time zones or different eras before electricity. The progression of physical markers follows the soul's development. In childhood, the signs might be subtle, unusual grace or clumsiness suggesting previous body types, food aversions that seem to have no basis in this life's experience, phobias of specific death methods. In adolescence, as the soul settles more fully into the new body, chronic conditions might emerge that resist all medical intervention, mysterious allergies, autoimmune conditions where the body seems to be rejecting itself because the soul and flesh haven't fully integrated. In adulthood, the full pattern becomes clear. You either learn to work with your body's peculiarities or you fight them and suffer. When old age, if you reach it, the body might finally align with the soul, achieving a grace and vitality that defies normal aging, or it might collapse early, worn out from housing a consciousness too intense for its structure. The collective dimension appears in families where old souls cluster. Genetic disorders that run in families might actually be soul-level patterns inscribing themselves across bloodlines. Steiner observed that certain physiological traits, like sensitivity to substances, unusual neurological patterns, or specific physical vulnerabilities, could indicate not just genetic inheritance, but karmic inheritance. The soul choosing bodies predisposed to conditions that will teach necessary lessons or facilitate specific soul work. Your physical protection protocol starts with honoring rather than fighting your body's quirks. If your sleep cycle doesn't match society's expectations, adjust your life to accommodate your rhythm rather than forcing your biology to conform. Food sensitivities might be your soul's memory of what sustained or poisoned you in previous lives. Listen to these signals. Physical practices like yoga, tai chi, or martial arts can help integrate soul and body, especially styles you feel inexplicably drawn to, which might be muscle memory from previous training. Steiner taught specific exercises for aligning the soul with its physical vehicle, movements and meditations designed to help ancient consciousness settle comfortably into modern flesh. The profound philosophical realization is that your body is not just a machine housing your consciousness, but a library containing the complete history of your soul's journey through matter. Every ache, every mark, every peculiarity is a clue to who you've been and what you've survived. Learning to read these physical texts transforms your relationship with your flesh from antagonism to alliance, recognizing your body as the faithful servant that has carried your soul through countless lifetimes and deserves respect, not resentment, for bearing visible proof of your ancient nature. There's a conflict happening all around you that nobody talks about because most people can't perceive it. But if you're an old soul, you feel it constantly. The spiritual friction between those just beginning their journey through incarnations and those approaching its end. This isn't metaphor. This is energetic warfare as real as any physical battle, playing out in every office, every family, every social gathering where consciousness of vastly different evolutionary stages collide. Rudolf Steiner mapped this hidden battlefield with precision, revealing that human society isn't just divided by class, race, or ideology, but by soul age, and these divisions create conflicts that conventional analysis cannot begin to address. New souls, those incarnating for perhaps their first or second time, operate with a vigor and confidence that old souls find both enviable and exhausting. Neuroscience research on what's called cognitive complexity shows that some individuals process reality in far more nuanced ways than others. Studies at Harvard's Laboratory for Developmental Studies found that while most people think in categorical binaries, certain individuals display integrative complexity, holding multiple contradictory perspectives simultaneously. Doctor? Robert Keegan's research on adult development stages revealed that most people plateau at conventional meaning-making, while rare individuals progress to post-conventional stages that completely reorganize how they understand reality. But what psychology calls development stages, Steiner understood as soul age markers, with new souls thinking concretely and old souls thinking in paradoxes and mysteries that baffle linear minds. Ancient traditions encoded this knowledge in systems of spiritual hierarchy. Hindu caste system, for all its abuses, originally attempted to organize society by soul age, with Brahmins as old souls focused on wisdom and spiritual pursuit, while Shudras as new souls focused on material labor and sensory experience. Buddhism's Arhat versus Bodhisattva distinction separates those focused on personal enlightenment from those capable of working for collective liberation. Gnostic Christianity divided humanity into hilics, material-focused new souls, psychics, emotional-focused intermediate souls, and pneumatics, spirit-focused old souls, each incapable of truly understanding the other's reality. These weren't oppressive hierarchies, but observational systems describing real differences in consciousness capacity. The battlefield signs manifest as inexplicable friction with certain people, regardless of surface compatibility. You meet someone who, on paper, should be your perfect friend or partner, same interests and values, but energetically you feel drained within minutes of interaction. New souls often react to old souls with instinctive hostility or discomfort, sensing something in your energy that threatens their worldview, even when you've said nothing challenging. You find yourself unable to explain your perspectives in ways new souls can grasp, not because you're inarticulate, but because you're operating from experiential frameworks they haven't yet acquired. The trivial concerns that consume new souls, status displays, material accumulation, social dominance games, feel alien to you but refusing to play these games marks you as strange, arrogant, or incompetent in their eyes. Old souls report feeling like they're constantly translating themselves into simpler language just to be understood, dumbing down their natural expression to avoid overwhelming or alienating those around them. The warfare escalates through predictable stages. Stage 1 is the confusion, where both sides sense something's off but can't name it. Stage 2 is the judgment phase, where new souls decide old souls are weird, pretentious, or dysfunctional, while old souls struggle with what looks like arrogance but is actually exhaustion at having to constantly interface with less developed consciousness. Stage 3 is open conflict, where new souls actively work to undermine, exclude, or punish old souls for not conforming to collective norms. Stage 4 is either segregation, where old and new souls simply avoid each other, or domination, where whichever group has power imposes its values on the other. History shows both patterns. Dark ages where new soul materialism crushes old soul wisdom, and Renaissance periods where old soul innovation temporarily leads culture forward. The collective dimension of this war plays out in institutions, corporations, and governments. Steiner observed that organizations naturally stratify by soul age, with new souls dominating middle management positions, requiring enforcement of rules without questioning their purpose, while old souls either rise to visionary leadership or drop out entirely, unable to tolerate the soul-crushing conformity of bureaucratic systems. Political movements split along soul age lines, new souls gravitating toward authoritarian certainty and simple solutions, old souls drawn to complexity, nuance, and recognition that most problems don't have easy answers. Culture wars that appear to be about policy are often fundamentally about consciousness stage conflicts, with each side literally unable to perceive reality the way the other does. Your survival protocol in this invisible war requires strategic camouflage when necessary. Learn to speak the language of new souls when context demands it, not from dishonesty, but from tactical wisdom, recognizing that you cannot be your full self in every environment without inviting attack. Build alliances with other old souls who can provide the understanding and resonance unavailable in mainstream settings. Create protected spaces, physical or virtual, where you can drop the exhausting mask of normality and exist in your full complexity. Steiner taught that old souls must learn to function as what he called spiritual warriors, holding higher truth while navigating lower reality, never compromising core integrity, but also not martyring yourself in futile attempts to enlighten those who aren't ready. The philosophical culmination is understanding that this warfare serves evolution itself. New souls need the structure and certainty they crave to develop the basic capacities old souls take for granted. Old souls need the friction of being misunderstood to refine their ability to transmit wisdom in forms that less developed consciousness can eventually absorb. The conflict isn't a mistake, but a feature of the incarnational system, and your role as an old soul isn't to win the war, but to hold space for the consciousness that wants to emerge, knowing that today's new souls will, in future incarnations, become tomorrow's old souls, carrying forward the very wisdom they currently reject. You hear things that others don't, not auditory hallucinations in the psychiatric sense, but whispers from dimensions adjacent to physical reality, voices that speak in the space between sleeping and waking, guidance that comes from sources you cannot see but know with absolute certainty are real. Rudolf Steiner didn't just acknowledge this phenomenon, he systematized it, teaching that old souls maintain partial conscious access to the spiritual realms they've traversed between incarnations. And this access manifests as what conventional reality labels delusion, but is actually perception of valid non-physical data. The veil between worlds grows thin for ancient spirits, and through the gaps comes information that can either illuminate your path or drive you mad, depending on whether you learn to work with it skillfully. Modern neuroscience stumbles toward this truth through research on hallucinations and anomalous experiences. Studies at Stanford by Dr. Albert Powers on predictive processing show that what we call reality is actually the brain's best guess about what's out there, a constructed model rather than direct perception. Research on sensed presence, the common experience of feeling someone nearby who isn't physically there, reveals that this phenomenon occurs in approximately 40% of the population during specific contexts like extreme isolation, grief, or meditation. Dr. Peter Brugger's work at University Hospital Zurich demonstrates that the brain has dedicated systems for detecting agency and intention, systems that, in certain individuals, remain active even when no physical person is present. But neuroscience interprets this as malfunction, when Steiner understood it as the soul's retained ability to perceive dimensions of reality that most people have learned to filter out. Sacred traditions across cultures not only acknowledged but cultivated this capacity. Shamanic cultures built entire healing systems on practitioners' ability to journey to non-physical realms and bring back information and power. Biblical prophets heard the voice of God with such clarity they could transcribe exact messages that changed civilizations. Islamic mystics describe the Alam al-Mithal, the imaginal realm between physical and purely spiritual dimensions, where souls encounter teachers, guides, and archetypal forces. Buddhist meditation practices specifically develop what they call the divine ear, the ability to hear sounds beyond normal frequency ranges, including the voices of celestial beings. These weren't primitive superstitions, but sophisticated technologies of consciousness, methods for safely accessing the very realms that old souls find themselves spontaneously perceiving. The signs that you're hearing the other side begin subtly. You might experience persistent ringing in your ears that medical tests can't explain, which esoteric traditions identify as the soul adjusting its frequency to perceive higher dimensions. You hear your name called when alone, or wake to voices speaking clearly only to find no one there. Music seems to come from nowhere, melodies you've never heard but feel you've always known. In crisis moments, you receive clear guidance in a voice that isn't yours but speaks with authority you trust more than your own thoughts. Children with old souls often report invisible friends who seem to possess distinct personalities, knowledge, and even predictive abilities that imaginary playmates shouldn't have. You might receive information about future events or distant occurrences that later proves accurate, knowing things you have no normal way of knowing. The phenomenon progresses through dangerous territory. Stage 1 is the initial contact, usually dismissed as imagination or tricks of tired mind. Stage 2 brings increasing frequency and clarity, where the voices or impressions become harder to ignore or rationalize away. Stage 3 is the crisis of interpretation, where you must decide whether you're experiencing genuine spiritual contact or descending into pathology. Stage 4 splits into two paths. Either you develop discernment and learn to work skillfully with these perceptions, or you lose the ability to distinguish between valid guidance and delusional thinking, a descent that can end in full psychotic break. Mental hospitals hold tragic examples of old souls who couldn't navigate this threshold, their genuine spiritual sensitivity pathologized and medicated into silence. The collective dimension manifests in families where psychic ability runs like a genetic trait, though it's actually soul-level capacity transmitting across bloodlines as old souls choose to incarnate together. Steiner observed that certain family systems maintain what he called spiritual heredity, lineages where communication with non-physical realms remains normalized across generations. These are the families that produce mediums, mystics, and individuals labeled mentally ill depending on whether the culture supports or suppresses such capacities. Group phenomena also occur, where multiple people simultaneously receive the same message or perceive the same presence, validation that something objective is happening beyond individual hallucination. Your protection protocol begins with establishing rigorous discernment practices. Not all voices from the other side deserve your attention or obedience. Negative entities, thought forms, and genuine pathology can all masquerade as spiritual guidance. Traditional tests for validating guidance include checking whether messages promote love, wisdom and growth versus fear, grandiosity, or harm. Does the guidance make you more compassionate or more arrogant? More connected to others or more isolated? Does it empower your agency or create dependency? Steiner taught specific meditation and prayer practices for clearing your perceptual field and connecting only with sources aligned with human evolution. Strategic engagement means you don't broadcast these experiences to people who will pathologize you, while also not isolating yourself in echo chambers where every stray thought gets inflated into cosmic revelation. Finding spiritual community that honors your experiences while maintaining healthy skepticism becomes essential. The philosophical insight is this: the voices you hear are real, but what they represent varies enormously. Some are genuine guidance from your higher self or spiritual helpers. Some are fragments of your own psyche speaking in projected form. Some are entities with their own agendas. Learning to navigate this terrain requires the humility to know you might be wrong, the courage to trust what you cannot prove, and the wisdom to test everything against the fruits it produces in your actual life. The veil is thin for you because you're meant to serve as a bridge between worlds, but bridges get walked on from both directions. And not everything trying to cross deserves passage. You came here for a reason. Before you incarnated, before you squeezed your vast consciousness into the tiny prison of infant flesh, you knew exactly what you were signing up for and you agreed to it. You chose your parents, your circumstances, your challenges, your gifts, all carefully calibrated to facilitate a specific piece of work that only you can do. But then you were born and you forgot. The veil of incarnation descended, amnesia locked in, and now you walk through life with a persistent feeling that you're supposed to be doing something important, something you cannot quite remember, a mission that gnaws at you with increasing urgency as time runs out. Rudolf Steiner dedicated enormous energy to helping people remember what they came to do, because an old soul living in forgetfulness of its purpose is one of the great tragedies of existence, wasted potential on a cosmic scale. Research in psychology on what's called self-concordant goals reveals that people experience the deepest fulfillment not from achieving society's definitions of success, but from aligning their actions with their authentic values and perceived life purpose. Dr. William Damon's studies at Stanford on purpose development show that individuals with strong sense of purpose experience better health, greater resilience, and higher life satisfaction. But what psychology cannot measure is the difference between ego-level purpose, I want to be rich or famous, and soul-level mission, I incarnated to heal ancestral trauma or hold space for consciousness evolution. Neuroimaging research on meaningful work shows distinct brain activation patterns when people engage in activities aligned with their values versus activities done purely for external rewards, suggesting the brain can distinguish between authentic and inauthentic purpose. Ancient wisdom traditions built entire systems around helping souls remember their pre-incarnation commitments. The Tibetan Book of the Dead describes the bardo, where souls review their past life and choose their next incarnation based on karma and evolutionary needs. Hindu philosophy teaches that each soul has a dharma, a unique role in the cosmic order that brings fulfillment when followed and suffering when betrayed. The Greek concept of daemon, later corrupted into demon, originally meant the personal spirit guide that knows your destiny and tries to steer you toward it. Plato taught that before birth, souls see the pattern of their coming life and swear to fulfill it, but upon incarnation they drink from the river of forgetfulness and spend their lives trying to remember what they promised. The clues to your forgotten mission appear throughout your life if you learn to read them. Persistent childhood fascinations that adults dismissed as unrealistic often point directly to soul purpose. The 8-year-old obsessed with ancient Egypt might be carrying memories of priesthood in that culture. Skills that come unnaturally easily, where you excel without formal training, suggest abilities refined over multiple lifetimes now being reapplied. Recurring dreams or visions, especially those involving specific historical periods, geographical locations, or types of work, are often the soul's memory trying to break through forgetting. You might feel pulled to causes or populations for reasons you cannot logically explain, a compulsion to help refugees when you've never been displaced, or to work with abused children when you've had a happy childhood. These impulses often indicate karmic commitments to heal what you once perpetrated or failed to prevent. Intense emotional reactions to certain topics, whether attraction or repulsion, frequently mark your mission territory. The stages of mission discovery follow a predictable arc. First comes the restlessness, a gnawing sense that your current life isn't your real life, that you're killing time until you figure out what you actually came to do. Second is the search phase, where you try different careers, relationships, locations, spiritual practices, desperately seeking the thing that will make your life make sense. Third is the crisis of meaning, often arriving in your 30s or 40s, where the gap between how you're living and what you dimly sense you should be doing becomes unbearable. Fourth is either breakthrough or breakdown, where you either crack the code of your purpose and radically reorganize your life around it, or you give up and settle into quiet desperation, medicating the persistent voice of your soul with whatever distractions you can find. The collective aspect of soul mission means you're not working alone. Steiner taught that souls incarnate in groups to work on collective projects that span centuries. You might be part of a soul family tasked with shifting consciousness in a particular domain: art, science, social justice, spiritual understanding. Finding your fellow mission bearers creates exponential amplification of impact, which is why certain historical moments see clusters of genius appearing simultaneously in the same field, not coincidence, but coordinated incarnation of souls with related assignments. Entire civilizations rise and fall based on whether enough old souls remember and execute their missions in the same time frame. Your protocol for mission recovery starts with asking the right question, not what do I want, but what wants to be done through me. Meditation practices focused on this inquiry can pierce the veil of forgetting. Life review exercises where you map patterns across your existence often reveal the mission hidden in plain sight. Working with guides who understand soul-level purpose, whether therapists trained in transpersonal psychology or spiritual directors from contemplative traditions, provides external mirrors for what you cannot see yourself. Steiner taught specific meditation sequences for accessing the Akashic records, the cosmic database where all soul contracts are stored and can be consciously reviewed. The profound philosophical truth is this: your mission isn't something you invent, it's something you discover. It's been there all along, encoded in your gifts, your wounds, your passions, your resistances. The very things you've been running from often turn out to be exactly what you came to heal or transform. Your greatest suffering frequently points to your deepest purpose. And the tragic irony is that many old souls die having never remembered what they came to do, returning to the other side to face the devastating recognition of opportunity wasted, only to choose to come back again and try once more to remember before time runs out. There's a breaking point beyond which the soul doesn't just suffer, it shatters. Rudolf Steiner observed in his most disturbed patients a phenomenon that modern psychiatry calls dissociation, but is something far more profound and dangerous. The actual fracturing of consciousness across dimensions, where pieces of the soul splinter off and become lost in realms the person can no longer access, leaving them functionally incomplete in their incarnated form. This isn't metaphor. This is the spiritual equivalent of a bone breaking into fragments, and if not properly treated, the soul can remain crippled across multiple lifetimes, unable to fully incarnate, unable to properly die, existing in a twilight state of partial presence that feels like being trapped between worlds. Old souls are particularly vulnerable to this fate because they're already operating at the edges of what incarnation can contain. The neurological correlates of this phenomenon appear in research on dissociative identity disorder and complex PTSD. Studies by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk at the Trauma Center in Massachusetts demonstrate that severe trauma can fragment consciousness into separate self-states, each holding different memories and personality characteristics. Brain imaging shows that these aren't just psychological constructs, but neurologically distinct patterns of activation. But what neuroscience sees as fragmentation of self, Steiner understood as fragmentation of soul, where extreme stress causes pieces of consciousness to literally split off and exist quasi-independently. Research on out-of-body experiences and depersonalization reveals that consciousness can perceive itself as separate from the physical body, suggesting that the bond between soul and flesh is more tenuous than materialist science acknowledges and can be disrupted under certain conditions. Ancient traditions recognized soul fragmentation and developed elaborate healing systems to address it. Shamanic cultures practice soul retrieval as a core healing modality, journeying to non-ordinary reality to find and return soul parts lost through trauma. Indigenous wisdom holders teach that pieces of soul can be left behind in places of intense emotion, stolen by negative entities, or flee in terror from experiences too painful to endure. The Catholic Church's rite of exorcism addresses cases where fragmentation has progressed so severely that other entities occupy the spaces where soul parts should be. Buddhist Abhidharma philosophy describes consciousness as constructed from multiple aggregates that can come apart under extreme conditions. Kabbalistic Judaism teaches about Shevirat Hakalim, the breaking of the vessels, understanding that sometimes consciousness containers crack under the weight of experience they were designed to hold. The signs of soul fragmentation start subtly, then accelerate into crisis. You might experience persistent déjà vu or jamais vu, the sense that familiar places feel foreign or that you've already lived moments that should be new. Lost time becomes common, gaps in your day you cannot account for, a drive home with no memory of the journey. Parts of your personality seem to operate independently, as if you contain multiple selves who don't know about each other, switching between modes so drastically that people comment on how different you seem. Chronic depersonalization sets in, where you feel like you're watching your life from outside rather than living it, a protective mechanism when the soul cannot bear full presence in the body. Physical symptoms manifest, unexplained pains that migrate around the body, exhaustion that sleep doesn't touch, a feeling that pieces of you are literally missing. Memory becomes unreliable, not from normal forgetting, but from actual gaps where experiences should be stored but aren't, because the soul part that witnessed those experiences is no longer integrated. The progression toward complete fragmentation follows a catastrophic curve. Stage 1 is normal dissociation, zoning out during stress, using fantasy to escape difficult reality. Stage 2 brings habitual splitting, where you increasingly operate from partial self-states rather than integrated wholeness. Stage 3 is the crisis point, where major trauma or sustained overwhelm causes actual soul fracturing, pieces breaking off and becoming stuck in the moment of trauma or fleeing to other dimensions. Stage 4 is either healing intervention that retrieves and reintegrates lost parts, or permanent fragmentation where you remain fractured across the rest of this incarnation and possibly beyond. The most severe cases result in what Steiner called spiritual homelessness, where so much of the soul has fragmented that the person cannot fully incarnate or properly die, existing as a ghost in their own life. Fragmentation can ripple through family systems and communities. One person's shattered soul creates energetic gaps that others rush to fill, leading to codependency and enmeshment where boundaries between individuals dissolve. Children of fragmented parents often develop precocious abilities to perceive and track the adult's multiple self-states, becoming hypervigilant to which version of the parent is present at any moment. Collective trauma, war, genocide, pandemic can fragment entire populations, creating cultures where normal wholeness becomes rare and everyone operates from partial selves. Your emergency protocol when facing fragmentation starts with cessation of further harm. Remove yourself from traumatizing environments before attempting healing. Soul retrieval work with trained practitioners, whether shamanic healers, specialized therapists, or spiritual guides, becomes essential. You cannot retrieve your own soul parts once they've fully split off. You need external help. Somatic therapies that work directly with the body's trauma storage can provide pathways for reintegration. EMDR, internal family systems therapy, sensoromotor psychotherapy, these modalities developed by people who intuitively understood soul fragmentation even if they used psychological language. Intensive spiritual practice, particularly traditions with initiation systems designed to put you back together after ritual dismemberment, can facilitate reintegration. The mystic path in every tradition includes death and rebirth processes that parallel the breaking and healing of the soul. The ultimate philosophical insight is that fragmentation, while dangerous, can also be transformative if properly guided. Shamanic initiation often involves deliberate soul shattering under controlled conditions, the spirits literally taking the initiate apart before reconstructing them with greater capacity. The dark night of the soul, described by mystics, is often a fragmenting process where old identity structures must break before the soul can reorganize at a higher level. Your fragmentation might not be failure, but initiation, the universe offering you an opportunity to reconstruct yourself more authentically. But without proper support and guidance, what could be transformation becomes tragedy, and the soul that breaks without skilled help may never fully repair, carrying its fractures forward into death and beyond. There comes a time, if you're very fortunate or have worked very hard across many lifetimes, when you finally earn your exit from the wheel. Rudolf Steiner taught that the ultimate purpose of all these incarnations, all this suffering and learning and dying and being born again, is to eventually transcend the need for it entirely, to graduate from Earth School and return to the spiritual dimensions from which you originally descended, but now carrying the consciousness you forged through your journey through matter. This is the final freedom, the permanent liberation that every old soul dimly remembers and desperately seeks. And you're approaching it when this incarnation feels less like a life and more like a very long goodbye to a world you know you won't be returning to. The scientific framework for this exists in quantum consciousness research and theories of information, persistence beyond death. Dr. Stuart Hameroff's work with physicist Roger Penrose on orchestrated objective reduction proposes that consciousness arises from quantum processes in brain microtubules, and that this information doesn't dissolve at death, but returns to the universal quantum field. Research on terminal lucidity, where people with severe dementia suddenly regain full consciousness shortly before death, suggests consciousness exists independent of brain function and can manifest fully when the time comes to depart. Studies on shared death experiences, where attending family members perceive the dying person's consciousness leaving the body and feel themselves partially entering the death process, indicate that death is not annihilation, but transition to a state others can partially perceive. But science only hints at what Steiner knew directly through spiritual perception, that death for the old soul completing its incarnational cycle is radically different from death for the young soul who will soon return. Ancient traditions across cultures taught specific preparation practices for the ultimate departure. Tibetan Buddhism's Phawa practice trains consciousness to exit the body at death through the crown chakra, ensuring transition into higher realms rather than automatic reincarnation. Egyptian mystery schools prepared initiates through rehearsed death experiences, teaching them to navigate the duat, the realm between lives, without losing consciousness. Hindu scriptures describe Vidaha Mukti, liberation without body, and Jivan Mukti, liberation while living, both pointing to conscious transcendence of the reincarnation cycle. Christian mystics spoke of beatific vision, direct perception of the divine that some achieve while alive and all righteous souls receive after final judgment. These weren't different afterlives, but different descriptions of the same process. Consciousness trained and purified enough to merge back into source rather than bouncing back into matter. The signs that you're approaching your final incarnation manifest as a peculiar relationship with death. You find yourself thinking about it not with fear, but with something closer to anticipation, a sense that you're almost finished with an incredibly long journey. Your attachment to earthly concerns loosens not from depression, but from recognition that they simply matter less when you know you're leaving soon. Life starts to feel like you're wrapping up loose ends, completing unfinished business, saying goodbyes to people and places with unusual finality. You might experience previews of death, near-death experiences, or profound meditative states where you glimpse what's waiting on the other side and return without fear, sometimes without even wanting to return. Dreams increasingly feature the dead, ancestors, and guides preparing you for transition. Your physical body might begin its decline despite your consciousness remaining sharp, the vehicle wearing out because the driver knows the destination is near and isn't trying to maintain it for another long trip. The final approach progresses through sacred stages. First comes the completion of major karmic debts, finishing the business that required incarnation in the first place. Second arrives a deep peace that others notice, a settling into yourself that no longer seeks anything from the external world. Third, brings increased periods of consciousness existing between worlds, where you're less and less fully present in physical reality and more oriented toward what's beyond. Fourth is the actual death process, which for the prepared soul becomes a conscious exit, a deliberate stepping out of flesh into freedom, maintaining full awareness through the transition that most experience as unconscious dissolution. The difference between the old soul's final death and the young soul's recurring death is that the old soul doesn't lose consciousness, doesn't forget, carries full awareness through the transformation and beyond. This transcendence has collective implications. When sufficiently evolved souls complete their incarnational cycles and return to Source, they don't disappear, but become available as guides and teachers for those still journeying through matter. The Bodhisattva vow in Buddhism acknowledges this, choosing to remain accessible to help others achieve liberation rather than disappearing into nirvana. Steiner taught that great spiritual teachers from humanity's past, Buddha, Christ, and others, represent souls who completed their personal evolution but chose to remain engaged with human development from spiritual dimensions. Your own completion and return affects everyone still incarnating, raising the vibration slightly, making the path marginally easier for those following behind. Your preparation protocol for final departure involves completing relationships, finishing your mission work as fully as possible, making peace with everyone, including yourself. Meditation practices focused on consciousness transfer, learning to shift your awareness from body to soul to spirit at will, train you for the ultimate shift at death. Contemplating death daily, as Buddhist monks do with charnel ground meditations, normalizes what culture teaches you to fear. Making peace with non-existence, recognizing that your ego will dissolve, even as your essential consciousness persists transformed, eases the transition. Steiner taught specific exercises for strengthening the eternal part of consciousness that survives death and transcends incarnation, building the soul capacities that persist beyond the temporary personality. The ultimate philosophical revelation is this: you were never really here. Your true home has always been beyond the physical, and all these lifetimes were just a very long class trip into matter. You descended from spirit into flesh to learn what can only be learned through direct experience of limitation, suffering, death, rebirth. You came to develop capacities that pure spirit cannot develop, compassion forged through suffering, wisdom earned through mistakes, love tested by separation. And now finally, you're ready to go home, carrying back to Source the precious treasures you've mined from matter, a consciousness that knows itself through having forgotten itself, a spirit that chose limitation to discover its own unlimited nature, a soul ancient beyond measure returning at last to the eternal present from which it never truly departed, completing the circle that was always, already perfectly complete.